Inshallah, the format is we have students of Imam Deen Muhammad, and they're going to be talking about the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad and their experience with the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad, along with the methodology. And inshallah, that will give us an opportunity to maybe ask some questions regarding the language or methodology, or if we have any questions regarding the workshop, or any questions regarding Ramadan. So inshallah, we'll start actually with Imam Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa ba'd. Dear beloved believers, Muslims, we greet you again. Assalamu alaikum. We want to thank Almighty God Allah for this pre-Ramadan conference that is put on by the San Antonio Masjid as well as the Austin Community Masjid. And it is a conference to really heighten the expectations for Ramadan, which I don't think too many Muslims need that. We always look forward to Ramadan, but it's good to come into Ramadan with a sober mind, not a mind of fear where I got to start fasting, etc. And this panel discussion, I'm told that we are to discuss and interact with the language of our late leader, Imam Deen Muhammad Rahmahullah alayhi, who gave so much of his energy and time to bring us out of symbolic language, scriptural confusion, to the clarity. And I'm happy to be here because we're all students of Imam Muhammad, but I'm working very hard as well as Imam Yahya with some others to elevate and promote our young adults, both men and women, to pick up the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad to give clarity. Now I want to say this to you, too. When people say the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad, the first question is, what is that language? What is that language? Is it English? Is it Arabic? No, it's conceptual language that comes clearly from Quran. His language was the language of the Quran. I want you to understand this. I told this to a group of imams at one conference they were having, and they were talking about the followers of Imam Muhammad or his community. They would say his community, Imam Muhammad's community is this and that. And I told him, I said, do you know Kiara Lubick is a part of Imam Muhammad's community? The Dalai Lama, he built ties outside of just the African American people. In fact, when he came into office in 1975, he was giving a lecture in Chicago, and he said, you know, Allah brought me back to this community here for a purpose. He said, I was going to let you all hear about me in Africa. He said, I was going to start my mission in Africa and let y'all hear about me from over there. You know, because most of us know he was excommunicated and put out and etc. But he said Allah brought him back. And he said, and he's here for a reason. So now that we have come this far, you know, we have an obligation to continue the language insights of the Imam from the Quran. I'm going to be emphasizing this more and more and more, you know, because he told me once, he said, you don't have an Islamic community without the Quran. It just ain't going to happen. You know, people want to do this, they want to do that, and do that. He said, but if the Quran is not directing our life and our interests, we're going into darkness. You know, you can mention a name here and mention a name. You can even mention the name Allah. He said, my father used the name Allah in the Quran and etc. But there was not a strong interest in developing the Quran in the community. You know, even though it was recited and etc. In fact, I started taking Arabic in 1970. You know, but if I begin to tell you the opposition I had just studying Arabic, my brother told me, he said, brother, why you going to that class? You can't get no Arabic, you can't stay on no papers with Arabic. Allah gonna teach us Arabic when we get to Egypt in the twinkling of an eye. And I had just came in. I'm saying, wow, you know. So the interest of the Quran was diminished by forces that came into our community back during that time. Some of us know Imam Don al-Karim. He's very good in Arabic, and he was one of the ones who studied with Imam Muhammad in school, and that interest diminished. I had to go find Darnell to ask him how to recite a verse and etc. In '69, you know. So the interest in Arabic and the Quran was sabotaged in our community. Imam Warafuddin Muhammad rahimahullah alayhi, he brought that interest back. He brought that interest back with a full force of enthusiasm and drive. And he articulated from the Quran in his expression directions for us to begin to learn the Arabic and the Quran. So when you say the language of Imam Muhammad, first point to the Quran. First point to the Quran, and then begin to study the Quran. If you want to learn his language, because you have, and I know imams. I know imam who quote the imam, but they're not connected with the quote. I've not said it. I hear, I'm not criticizing. I'm not criticizing, but I have to speak frankly, especially for our young adults, because I talk to them all the time as much as I can to encourage them in this direction. But we have people who will read from the Imam and quote from the Imam and then can't connect the insights from it. How did he get that? You see, you know, remember the Imam, if you listen to him, he said, I would not be who I am today if it was not for the Quran. How many have heard us say that? You said that many times. I would not be who I am for the Quran and my sincerity. He said, I was sincere in reading the Quran. And he was. And I've had personal relationship with him. Imam Yahya has, and there are others. And he can tell you, Imam Muhammad was not only a talker, but he lived this religion. And he did things, I'll give you an example. We went into an ice cream place one time in Chicago, and this Caucasian behind the counter was just very mean. What do you want? Like that. And I said, brother Imam, I said, let's go someplace else. He said, no. He said, he was real calm. He said, no. He said, give me that right there. Is there anything else? And give me a dip of that, and that right there. And he walked down the other side and say, give me one of those. And are you finished? You know, just real rude. And I'm ready to jump behind the counter, slap upside the head, but I had grown up a little bit more. So he said, no, I just want to get some nuts on it. She took a deep breath and said, is that all? He said, no, you eat it. Let's go, Casa. We walked out. I said, boy, Imam, that was bad. You know. He said, no, she didn't want to wait on us, so I made her wait on us. I made her, and she would remember that more than me doing something to her. And she'd go back saying, I had to wait on that nigga, you know. So I'm telling you, his language was not just talking, but his language was his example and expression in everyday life. And I can relate many stories, you know, to see the impact of the Quran on his expression and how he dealt with people, how he dealt with other leaders, how he dealt with imams, people that I knew that he had mentioned that was doing things. They were doing things. And I would tell him something, you know. He said, well, they can't hurt us. I said, why is that, brother? Man, they doing this and he said, because they don't know where I'm going. He said, how can you get in my way and you don't know where I'm going? You know, that's what he said. Common sense, you know. So it's just so and as I since his leaving us physically, you know, things that he gave me or talked to me about, etc. Now I'm seeing them. I'm seeing them better. You know how when your parents tell you something and you don't see it until way later on? Okay, that's what's happening every day with me almost. You know, wow, that's what the Imam meant. Wow, you know. And so when you say the language of Imam Deen Muhammad, you're talking about what makes you up. And what makes you up is not just what is spoken, but also what is done. You see, so isn't that an example of Muhammad the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He had the Quran and the Sunnah. You know, now if somebody who's not in the context of our support system, they say, no, then I know what he's saying, that Imam Muhammad had a Sunnah. Everybody has a Sunnah. Did you know that? The tree has a Sunnah. The apple tree, the seed, is the Sunnah of that apple tree. It follows that Sunnah. You see, so, but it's not, but Muhammad the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had a Sunnah that was the example for all humanity. Not just men, but women too. So, and what was his Sunnah? What was his Sunnah? Obedience to Allah. Imam Muhammad said this. He said, nowhere in the Quran will you find the Sunnah of Muhammad, but you will find Sunnah Tillah. You will find the Sunnah of Allah. And the whole creation expresses that Sunnah when it obeys what Allah created it to do. So Muhammad the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you refer to his Sunnah, his life, you're referring to his obedience to Allah. So what did Allah say in the Quran? Whoever obeys the messenger obeys Allah. Isn't that powerful? Whoever obeys the messenger obeys Allah. And Allah says also in the Quran, Qul in kuntum tuhibbuna Allah fattabi'uni tuhibbuna Allah. It says that, say, if you love Allah, then follow me. So, the language ideal of Imam Deen Muhammad and what we hope to try and share with you today, that it was the Quran. If you study the Quran, everybody has the ability to study it. There's no priest class, there's no ecclesiastic class. Everybody has a Quran. If I ask everybody who has a Quran, you raise your hand. Then I say, now, Ramadan is coming, right? This is a pre-Ramadan conference. What is the main ideal of Ramadan? Ramadan is the month in which what came? The Quran came. Read that verse 2 and 185. And it has three, it says it came as a guidance, you know, for humanity, and as a guide and a furqan. And then it says later on in there and said, and whoever follows this guidance, they are grateful to it. So guidance is mentioned in there 3 times. Furqan is mentioned in there once. The Furqan, though, it says Hudan wal Furqan. It is a guide to help you make a distinction between all the other guys you got out here. And there's a lot of them. Everybody's trying to guide you every day. So in order to make that distinction, you need read the Furqan. So again, Imam Wafdi Muhammad rahimahullah laid just emphasis in almost every meeting that I had with him or been with him, etc. You know, he referred us to the Quran. Am I right? Yeah. He didn't go to Socrates or Thucydides or Themistocles or Herodotus or any other. He might mention them, but he would mention other scholars in the context of Quran. So what is my advice as we do this introduction? The Quran is the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad. And when you study his teachings and etc., try and see where the Quran is in it.
Assalamu alaikum. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasul. When I think of the language of Imam Wafdi Muhammad, I dead on with Imam Qasim to say that the language of Imam Wafdi Muhammad was the Quran. But we also know, coming from an environment where we were placed in a unique language environment, coming from the Nation of Islam, and we were able to maintain our identity through a unique language environment. And we also see that when we look at things like scientists. They're saying plain things, but because they dominated the language that they use, they created a circle that is unique for them. And Imam Muhammad knew that. He knew the power of words, he knew the power of language. And one of my favorite quotes when I was younger was, revelation came down through through the minds of the Greeks, through the hands of the Chinese and the tongues of the Arabs, because they had a mastery on the language. And we were sitting in class and the question was asked, when were you born? And I'm born in 19 this and that. And he said, no. He said, you were born in 1933. And I'm like, man, I'm kind of old around here, you know? Added some years on me. So he goes on to explain that we were in such a unique womb, in such a unique environment, that when he was born, it was the birth of every one of us. Allah allowed his birth to be an example and a manifestation of the birth of all African Americans who wanted to exemplify and live a life that was in accordance with his will. So it's almost, he compared it to Mary. And we understand when Imam Muhammad shares things, or when Allah speaks about things in the Quran, Imam Muhammad teaches on them. He taught us that a lot of these stories that we get are not literal. And in the story of Mary, I love studying the different prophets, because you can always see how the life of these different prophets is really just a scheme that is used in society. And scheme not always in a negative way, but a scheme or a plan that is used in society over and over again. So we have the Mary complex. Mary is a woman that represents a community. And this community was given a child that is pure and untouched by the world, untouched by the rational thinking and the ideologies of science and things that were external, but cultivated in the house that she was of. So it was cultivated in that, and that house was a house that was for God, a house that sacrificed, a house that tried to purify themselves strictly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So she was born in this environment. She was this environment. Mary represented that environment. And out of that environment came Jesus. And that story is the story of Moses, Yusuf, every other, is our story. Our story, particularly in the Nation of Islam. And I love Farad, and I love the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, because they understood these things. He understood this Jesus technique. that you create an environment that is unique by structuring the environment, the language, and what's going on. And out of that, if it's cultivated right and is in a right position, a Jesus figure or someone who will come to liberate the people will birth in that situation. And that's what Imam Muhammad was for us. He was the birth of our minds coming into a new expression and a liberation for our history here in America, for our history post-America, and how we ended up on these shores. So what happens is we're in this word environment, we're in this unique space, and out of that came Imam Muhammad, and he was born. And all of us was born in that instance. Because that is what we all attach to. That is the hope that we all live by. That is our inheritance. His birth was our inheritance. Allah says we rise and fall as one. So when he rose, we all rose. So I take that to heart when we look externally and say, oh, that's the Imam, that's the language of Imam Muhammad, that's his methodology. No, that's mine. That's yours. That's your language. Because you ascribe to that thinking and you ascribe to that way of life, so it's yours. But Allah just preserved it in one human. So when we look at, I'm gonna stay out of politics. So when we look at situations where we're instructed that we can't use that language, or one individual monopolizes the language of Imam Muhammad, then that's problematic. Because it's your life, it's yours, it's your inheritance. It is what Imam say, the wall lace, when the story of Moses, and he's traveling with the wise men and they build that wall up to protect the inheritance that is underneath for the orphan child. That was Imam. He was that wallace. He was that wall lace, that protection that will provide us with that wisdom and that hikmah that only Allah could have given us. And that is the true, pure example and understanding of the Quran and Muhammad the Prophet. And I always tie that back, just kind of like riding with Imam Qasim, we say piggyback. They say, we don't piggyback, we camelback, you know. But just riding along with Imam Qasim, with two arrows going to the same mark, when he says that, it was the example of his life. It was a statement that really was profound to me. The question was asked to Imam Muhammad. It said, oh Imam, what is the Muslim world missing? What is it? They ain't got the Quran anymore. He said, no, brother. He said, they have the Quran. He said, you can go over there and you can find 1,001 Hafiz. They have the Quran. He said, well, what is it that they ain't living it? It's something. He said, they lost the spirit of Muhammad the Prophet. So that is the difference. Our language is so unique because the world had lost the spirit of Muhammad the Prophet. The world had lost that. And in the very choice of words and concepts and the movement of Imam Muhammad, he relayed to us the spirit of Muhammad the Prophet again. And the spirit is what carried the Quran. He was the Quran walking, Muhammad the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the Quran walking, and he carried that. So it is the spirit in which comes with the Quran that makes our situation so beautiful. The duality. You have the actual words and the wisdom of the Quran, and then the spirit in which it conveys it. And we see it all the time. It's really unique when you invite people to your masjid, and we actually say Al-Fatiha together. But these are the things that the Prophet did. He would wait you'll see the Imam, well, we're going to wait till everyone finish making wudu before we start. That is the spirit of Islam. That is the spirit of Muhammad the Prophet. And then when you have that spirit and you hold that disposition in your heart and in your actions, and then you say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadan Rasulullah, that carries a whole nother meaning than when you're rigid. When you know, that's two different things. The spirit alone is what captured us. They didn't even have the Quran in the first, but they had the spirit. And all of us was, my parents, myself, because I was born in 1933, we were all captivated, and we they joined this way of life. But then when you take that spirit, and then on top of that, you put the wisdom, the words, and the understanding that is from Allah, and you approach the Quran with the spirit of Muhammad, a man who was in Arabia some 1400 years ago, who was troubled and burdened in his soul so deep that he prostrated he went into a cave. And many of you have been on Hajj and you've seen the cave. He went into this small cave in order to get away from what's going on in the world, and he begged Allah for peace in his soul. He begged Allah for understanding, and Allah gave him direct revelation from him. So that's the spirit that we operate off, that kind spirit that didn't lie, the kind spirit that wanted to see good for everyone. And then you approach the Quran with that, and it is only natural that you get out what Imam Muhammad got out. It's only the natural progression. Once you have that in your heart, and then you approach the words of Allah, then you get out man means mine. You get out things like all these different things, you know. One of my favorite was, you start to see things through those visions, through those glasses, and it's the beauty of it. And that is a two-part thing when it comes to the language of Imam Warthi Muhammad when I see. So like Imam Qasim said, you see a lot of brothers that can quote it, but they don't have the spirit. And you'll sit there, you'll be like, this brother Darlene, he missing something. He aiming for something. I see where he going. Well, he just clearly missed the mark, you know? And you'll see that. So we have to connect back to that spirit, and we have to get the spirit of Muhammad, the spirit that Imam Muhammad had. And I think that's a lot of problems with our masjids now too, is that we lost that. We're losing that. We're letting the world give us their spirit, and we're losing the spirit that Muhammad the Prophet, Imam Warthi Muhammad, had. So now when we read the Quran, we can't see the beauty in it. We read the Quran. Like I was doing a sister session, and then I'm going to hand it to my beautiful brother, Imam Yahya. I was doing a sister session, and oftentimes as sisters, a lot of things in Quran we think are, it's masculine, and we take problem with it. But when you come with the spirit of Muhammad the Prophet Imam, you know that everything in the Quran is beautiful. The problem is my perception. And that's what you have to do. Everything in the Quran is tantamount to nothing that the world has ever endured. It is beautiful. So if I have a problem with anything, it's because the world perverts my perception, and I see it in a manner that disturbs my soul. So what you do is you take that, you put it on the shelf, until Allah purifies your perception and purifies something within you. That a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, that shaitan that's right there, that jinn that's within you, Allah purify it, and you see it in its beauty. And then that's how we come. And Imam Muhammad did that on a regular basis. And that's how he came to these profound things that he said, you know, that we can go all day just quote for quote what Imam says. Man, he said that? He said, you know. So don't get me started, I get excited. So alhamdulillah, that's when I see the language of Imam Muhammad, I see those two realities coming together.
I was sitting with the Imam in Chicago a few months before he passed, it was 2008. Obama had just won the primaries. Yeah, when I was in Chicago. And I didn't know who he was initially. My mind registered back when he spoke at the 2004 Democratic National Convention. So when I heard him when he won Iowa, I was listening to his speech, and I said, he's got our language. That sounds like the language of the Imam. Just what I said now, I didn't know it. So I'm sitting in the warehouse we're doing business with the Imam. So I said, Brother Imam, correct me if I'm wrong. I said, but I was listening to Senator Obama, and I don't know him, because he's from Chicago, I didn't know him. And I said, but I hear your language. And he smiled, he said, when I came in as the leader, when I became the leader, the Nation of Islam. He said, but before I became the leader, I knew what our problem was in America. He said, the Nation of Islam's language had poisoned the environment, the word environment. He said, so when I started teaching, I felt an obligation to clean up the poison language out of the environment of America. He said, and as I'm cleaning up the language in America that we put in the atmosphere to counter the poison that was already of white racism and white supremacy in the atmosphere, he said, we just poison the air worse. He said, so I saw it as an obligation on me to clean up the language environment. He said, and in cleaning up the language environment, that environment allowed the womb for Obama to be born out of that language. Yeah, so this ain't no light thing now. This ain't no light, this is serious. So that's one point. Now, he used to tell us, and I'm sure he might have told the students in his class, as imams, Imam Qasim knows this, he said this to us many times. He said, when you're listening to me or reading something I have said, look for the emphasis and direction. Now this is important now. Emphasis and direction. Why? Because in 1975, there was a different emphasis in the language because of where we were. As Kalima said, and Imam Qasim said, we didn't have the purity of the Quran, so he had to purify that atmosphere. From 75 to 85, that's 10 years. How long did Prophet Muhammad ﷺ work in Mecca? His first mission, first part of his work, how long? 13 years. Cleaning up the language environment from shirk to tawheed. The Prophet, praise and peace be upon him. So the Imam, following this same methodology for our circumstances. In 1985, the language changed. For the next 10 years, 85, I'd say probably 10 to 15 years, the emphasis in the language changed. Tell me what the emphasis was from 85 to right on up. The main emphasis from 85 to, I'd say, 2008 or 2003, 2005. Tell me what the main emphasis now. We're talking emphasis. Because we got a lot of language, but what's the emphasis and direction? Community life. Yeah. Then also business. I have the book right here, Islam's Climate for Businesses. Imam Qasim said he's right on. Now we're talking about the language, Imam, so I'm going to give you this language. I have some books here. Reading is fundamental. This is a new one. After Difficulty, Islam's Climate for Business Success. Lost for Searchers Seeking to Understand Life. The Promised Human Destiny. All these books are available. I have them, and Imam Farouk have some on the table. So you want to get the language. But let me read something here to you from the Imam and how this book came about. Now, this is in 1989. And I read this, and I had actually forgotten about it. Until I read it, I said, okay. Quote, page 5, Islam's Climate for Business Success. And this is important because Imam Muhammad's language also included business language. Imam Muhammad has lived a lifestyle of austerity. I'm quoting from the book. He ministers that the acquisition of wealth is for the good of the whole and not to be put to exaggerated self-adorations. The text of this book encompasses those lectures given by Imam Muhammad all across the United States in his contribution to improve the climate for success of America's less fortunate and to improve the climate to retain dignity for America's wavering achievers, be it through moral dilemma or economically unsound decision making. Now look, Imam Hatim, Talib, he began this particular series of lectures focusing on the business community and economic interests for Muslims on March 19, 1989 in Dallas, Texas, preparing his audience to make it in the land of plenty. And we were present, sitting there, I was hosting Imam. Now I'm going to turn to page 60 of the same book, his language. Well, I turned to 63 first, so there's a long way to give you down first. He said this, quote, I would like to see us grow with more appreciation for this religion as the religion of successful people. Allah says, and he quote, "And the believers must win through. The believers must triumph because what they believe in is productive." This is what we have been missing. We have been, listen to this carefully, brother imams, teachers, we have been misdirected and made afraid to talk about investing for achievement. Now, how did that happen? Nation of Islam didn't do it. We started listening to the people, and no bad thing on them. We started listening to what we call the Thole people. They just wear dresses, African American men walking around in dresses in America, in the hood. We started listening, they started infiltrating the community with these ideas. And Imam said we were misdirected and became afraid to talk about investing for achievement. Quote, "We want achievement and we want a continuous life." Allah the Merciful says to the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, when you finish one thing, get involved productively in something else. When we finish one thing, don't accept to be idle. Page 60. No, not 60. I'll give you 62. It's page 18. Yeah. He says, "I want you who identify as Muslims," this is what Imam Qasim was saying earlier, "and as business people," now this is on page 18, "to feel a closer relationship to the word of Allah in the Quran. I want you to feel that when you have the Quran, you have a partner with you in business. You don't have to go to a psychologist and pay a huge fee in order to get your spirit up and start thinking positive and to get the energy to go back to work. All you have to do is consult the pages of the Quran. I'll also tell you what to look for in the Quran. Look for that verse that says, 'Do not neglect your share of this world.'" That's chapter 28, verse 77. That is Allah, Imam Muhammad says, the Creator and Lord Most High talking. Before I read that in the Quran, I remember my parents told me the same thing, but not in those words. They said, "Son, make something of yourself and don't die poor." My mother had known mean poverty. And I do not blame anyone who knew poverty and still have their good senses for telling their children, "Don't die poor." All of us should look at a child in the morning and first say to this child, this is direction, that's the emphasis in direction. Here's direction. He said, all of us should look at our children in the morning, and the first thing we say to them is, "Assalamu alaikum," and right behind it, "and don't die poor." That is, be Muslim, be peace-loving believers, but don't die in poverty without having work to establish yourself. Now, shouldn't this also be required reading in the schools? I read out of this. If you all listen to my lectures on the Jummah or the CDs, or I don't care where I'm in the country, I read second part of the khutbah, because this is Imam Muhammad's language, Islam's climate for business success. We can't omit this. This has to be a part of the language. Now, the last one I'm going to read from, emphasis and direction. This is the new book, just came out. Reading is fundamental. Sign up there for the Spurs. Read to achieve. New book, Imam Muhammad. Page 111. Now, this is a powerful statement in our language from him. In the scheme that has dominated the world, they have black people, the children of Africa, and their descendants who are black, as the spiritual people. We're talking emphasis and direction in the language now. And they never want us, Imam Muhammad says, to establish ourselves economically or materially. They have given us religion. We didn't choose the church. They have given us religion to keep us spiritual, happy, and flighty, so that we never ground ourselves in economic life. Every effort started by our people to get our people to become business-minded and establish strong business life for themselves in our neighborhoods has been defeated. It is so difficult. They had a spiritual movement to bring it back. That is all Marcus Garvey's movement was about, bringing us to establish ourselves materially. Booker T. Washington used education, but what was the purpose of education? It was to establish our life materially. They manipulated W.B. Du Bois to compete with him, to see him as a rival for black people's support, love, and admiration. Consequently, W.B. Du Bois undermined the position of Booker T. Washington. They didn't embrace each other. They represented two ideas that were clashing with each other, and they should have been embracing each other because both ideas go together. Progressing politically and progressing materially should be together. But they were influenced to see each other as rivals. Again, the Satan scheme. There are others I'm sure you don't know about. I studied a lot of things. I studied deep. That which I thought had a connection with our interests, I studied to see what was to it. There were other African Americans also who tried to do the same thing. I'm talking about big movements of black people in radio or something like that. They defeated them. It was the same with Father Divine. He had his own church. It was spiritual, but he did a lot to try to help his people be responsible for material possessions, material accomplishments, and money. But they were defeated, and they just lost their spirit. Now I conclude with this one. Imam Qasim and I, again, we were in Little Rock, Arkansas. I mentioned this when I was in Little Rock. 1992, Imam Johnny Hassan said it. I was telling somebody about this. Qasim said, about 24 of us. It was a Ramadan session. And we went to Holiday Inn, and Imam was teaching just his language. Now, this was in 92 now. In early mid-90s. Johnny said 92, 96. I think it was close to 92. And Imam was just teaching us. We sitting there, he was going. He was in Greek philosophy, Greek mythology, ancient Egyptian, Roman mythology. I'm saying ancient Egyptian mythology, Roman mythology. And he just teaching. And honestly now, Imam Qasim here, he tell you, our eyes glazed over. This is how deep it was. This is Ramadan too. We sitting there like this. And glossy-eyed, semi-conscious, because he was just, it was so deep. Just the Imam, about 24 of us, early days. And the Imam picked up and sensed that what he was dropping on us was heavy and it was messing with our mind. So he looked at us, he stopped, he said, y'all all right? And we said, oh yes sir, brother man, we all right. No, we were out, we were half out. And he goes more. This went on for about an hour and 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours. Then in the middle of the conversation, his language, he cut it, like they say in the nation, a shortage in the atmosphere. Shoop! He cut it like that. He said, everything I just told y'all, we were sitting there, are nothing but words in the air if y'all don't get y'all some money. You can't go nowhere with nothing I just told you if you don't put it in material reality. We were sitting there. Boom, just cut across it. Now, here's the last point that I want to tell you. 2008, 3 months before he passed, we talking. We working on the suits, got the suits from China. And Imam Khalil will tell you this, Qasim too. He don't talk long on the telephone. Then 15 minutes, boom, he's off that phone. That's where you are. This particular day, the conversation went on about 45 minutes. I'm saying conversation, but I'm the one listening more than, I'm the talking. Yes, sir, brother man. 45 minutes of this conversation. And here's what he said. Language for emphasis and direction. Imam Yahya. Yes, sir. You know what my main concern is for this community right now? Now, remember I said this is 2008, 3 months before he passed now. Direction. Emphasis. He said, I'm not worried. He said, first let me tell you what I'm not concerned about with our community. He said, I'm not concerned about us going back to false worship. We will never, ever again go back to church, believing the man is God. We won't do it. He said, I have no concerns about this community not making salah, prayer. we gonna pray. He said, I have no concern about us fasting Ramadan properly every year. We gonna do it. He said, I have no concerns about us performing the Hajj when we can. We gonna do it. He said, but here's my concern. If we don't establish ourselves economically, he said, this is my main concern. He said, if we don't establish ourselves economically, we are going to remain small. If all we have are small resources, we can't fund our schools. Well, we only have like 12 or 13 schools in the Muslim Journal now because of money. So that's what he told me in 08 on that phone for 45 minutes. He said, that is my main concern right now. That's all they
When my sister called about me being on this panel, I initially, when she asked, and she was saying Imam Kazim, and right, Imam Yahya, and talking about the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad, she sent a text. I looked at the text. I went the whole day, right? I didn't reply back to the text. And I'm thinking, I'm like, is that a good idea? So I was thinking, and I sent her a message back. I said, it's taking me too long to decide, so the answer is no. If it was clear to me from the very first, when the moment that she asked me, if my immediate, my movement, my nature is yes, then my answer is yes. But it was taking me, it was too much back and forth. So I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I said, I'm going to leave that to Imam Kazim, Imam Yahya. They got it. I don't think it's going to be done poorly. So then she called me and she said, mashallah, she said, I understand. She said, it would have just been nice to have a female's perspective, right? She said, and she was like, you know, you weren't there with the Imam, so that's even a different perspective. I said, oh, these are good thoughts, once again, right? And then my mother, you know, my mother is still my best confidant, right? And she came to me and she was like, yes, you should do it. Right? She was like, why not? She was like, this is the same person who at one point said, why do they want you to keynote speak? But she said, why not? I said, okay. I said, hey, you all think it's a great idea. I said, it's right. It's a different perspective. I'll do it. When I got here, because this was before, I don't know if they had asked Kalima. When I got here, I was thinking, man, Kalima should be on the panel. This was my thought. And I was like, but that's not my spot to do. I said, because I don't know what Allah has in place. See, Allah moves things for us. We think we're making moves, but we're not making moves. We're being obedient. And Allah is making the move. So I said, because my thinking is limited, I said, that's not my place for that. And when I looked at the schedule, Kalima was on. I said, Allahu Akbar. My thought was reality because it was in line with Allah. So when we came up here to sit down, Kalima was like, where should we sit? She was like, we put one in there. The natural, right? Listen, the natural thought, when you have two things that are different and you have more than one of them, it's only two, what do people do? One. You create a pattern, right? That's the usual pattern when they're two. I said, let's sit on the ends of them and let's wound them. Now listen, that was the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad. There have been times that I have sat down and I have given lectures and I haven't gone through as much tafsir and lived through as much tafsir as Imam Kazim or Imam Yahya. But I promise you, what delivers out of me is the tafsir without me ever reading it. Because it's the same thing that Kalima said. It's the same thing that Imam Yahya shared. When he put the word environment into Chicago, it gave birth to Obama. He didn't have to teach him literally. But he did, right? Yeah, but he did. But the environment delivers you. So here's the thing from the perspective of someone who I wasn't sitting with Imam Muhammad at no point in time, physically. But I sit with Quran constantly. I live Quran with everything in me. And then the Quran tells me that the language of Imam Muhammad is the language for today. It is the language and the conduit to pull the whole of the world out of the depths that it's in. That's a serious word. So that word can only be Quran. So here's the thing. The first thing that got me there was sincerity. And that's what Imam Kazim said, right? You all are sitting here and you want to say, how do I approach the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad? In the same fashion that you approach Quran. You first have to be very, very sincere. Because this language of Quran, which is the language that Imam W.D. Muhammad is utilizing, Allah says of Quran that only those who are pure will touch it. There are some who will not gain the language of Imam W.D. Muhammad because there may be something wrong with the purity and the sincerity. So you first have to be very, very sincere that you're not getting it just to pontificate. That you're just not getting it just to say that you got it. You're getting it to live it. You're getting it to build the wealth. You're getting it to change the world. And if you're not ready to do that, you're not ready to get it. Now, once you're sincere and you go into the thing, you're not going to understand everything now. But Allah also gives us direction in that from Quran. That when you go in, Allah says, get the things that you do know. And do those sincerely. Wazir gave the Imam's tafsir on wudu yesterday. And we can all just get wudu. We can build the wealth. So I'm telling you how I approach the Imam's tafsir from Quran is that I go in as sincere as possible and ready to work. People say, Anissa, they're calling you all over the place. I didn't ask people to call me. And if nobody ever called me again, it doesn't change what I do. And the only reason I answer the call is because I'm answering Allah's call. I'm not answering people's call for me because you're not asking for me. It's a burden on me because every time I come, I have to produce more. Not for you, but for Allah. So that's what it is. Be sincere. Get the smallest piece of the Imam's tafsir and live it. Don't just know it. Don't just be able to regurgitate it. I'm saying very sincerely, if you go through the levels of the soul and you take that one piece of tafsir, you go into it with Quran and you do it as if you are going to give the lecture as if it is the last thing that you will do on this earth. Approach it like that. As if you don't get it, the whole world will die.